You may recognize this screen as the Property Overview, the first screen that is displayed upon opening any report. To begin adding descriptions and comments to items, double-click on either the room or item you wish to begin with. If you double-click on a room, the room in question will be opened in the item description form with the first item it contains selected for editing. Notice the name of the room containing the items you are currently viewing is shown at the top, with the name of the item currently selected for editing displayed after it. And the selected item icon is shown highlighted with the thin red frame here. Click this Back button at any time to exit back to the Property Overview screen. Alternatively, if, while viewing the Property Overview, you double-click on a particular item in a room, the room in which the item is located will be opened with the item you clicked on already selected for editing. The arrow buttons to the left and right of the room title enable you to shuffle through the rooms, and the names adjacent to the arrows always display the rooms in the sequence after and before the room you are currently viewing. To view the previous room, click on this arrow button. And to view the room after the room you are currently viewing, click on this one. This column is for entering descriptions that summarize the main characteristics of the item. And this column is for entering notes about the particular condition of the item. Notice that the contents of the editing box below always match the contents of the field highlighted above. If you alter the contents of this editing box, the contents of the highlighted field above will reflect the changes made. So this is the way of editing an existing description or comment, or entering a new one, by selecting a description or comment field in the table, and adding or editing the corresponding text in the editing box below. However, there are many ways of entering text into the editing box, as I will demonstrate later. Navigating to the description and comment field you want to edit is simple. There are three main ways of moving around. Voice recognition commands are one way, although dictation and navigation using voice recognition software is dealt with as an entirely separate tutorial. Another way is by simply clicking on an item in a field directly, as I've been doing so far. The third alternative, which I'll use next, is to use the tab function, which steps you from one field to the next. You can use a tab button on a physical or touchscreen keyboard, or click on the tab buttons shown on the screen here. The order the tab function will follow is item description. By the way, for each item there is only one description field, and then each comment one at a time. When the last comment for a particular item or sub-item is highlighted, if you press tab again, the focus will switch to the description of the next sub-item if there is one, and then on the next press to the sub-item comments, and so on. If there are no further sub-items, then having reached the last comment, on pressing tab the focus will switch to the next main item, which in this case, as you can see above, is the walls. Finally, if you are viewing the last comment for the last item in a particular room, you guessed it, the focus will switch to the description of the first item in the next room, and so on throughout the report. The tab function is useful for stepping through the report and taking each item as it comes, but don't forget you can jump around at any time by clicking on rooms, items, and directly into a field. This Go to Top button will make the focus jump to the first description in view. In demonstrating the use of the tab function, I've mentioned main items and sub-items. So at this point, for those not used to the concept or terminology of main items and sub-items, I'd like to explain the distinction and the good reasons for making that distinction. To summarize, using main items and sub-items organizes items into logical groups, making items easier to find and reports more readable and thus more useful. A couple of report examples may help to illustrate this, so let's cut to have a look at part of a report already produced. This is how main items are shown on the report, and this is how sub-items connected to a main item are displayed. A door would be considered suitable to be entered as a main item in that it is a sizable element with a distinct purpose. However, a brass handle on the door could be said to be a part of the door, and thus we would recommend including it as a sub-item of a door. Other examples of items you could add as sub-items of a door might be door lock, door frame, etc. The same principle can also be used to create other kinds of item groups. For instance, you can add an item called walls and describe all the walls in a room under it, or even an item entitled furnishing and have a list of general room furnishings grouped inside, or a cupboard with not only the doors and shelves, but if you like, even the contents listed as sub-items. Note that, as with this last example of the cupboard, you can have sub-items of sub-items, the shelf being a sub-item of the cupboard, which is a sub-item of the furniture group, each group being indented below the item it is connected to. Ultimately, the use of main and sub-items is optional, and whether a particular item is included as a main item in its own right, or as a sub-item linked to another item, is up to the user. Any item can be added as a main item or a sub-item if desired. For instance, you could even say that a door is part of a wall, and indeed you could include the door as a sub-item of the wall if you wanted to. But although the distinction between main and sub-items is not always clear-cut with a hard and fast rule, nevertheless it is sometimes useful to visually group related items together, especially if they are physically connected and even form part of an item's functionality, like a handle or hinge being connected to a door. The various advantages of including, say, a brass handle as a separate though linked item, rather than just describing the handle as part of the general door description, are as follows. Firstly, it enables anyone to take in at a glance all the door accessories by glancing down a column rather than penetrating too deeply into the text. Secondly, it leads to shorter, more succinct descriptions and comments, with little or no need for punctuation and subclauses. These sentences are actually easier to write, as you won't be focusing on sentence arrangement, and they will also be read more easily and rapidly than a single long description or comment describing all aspects of the door. Thirdly, it enables anyone to see at a glance what element a comment is referring to, and it also enables photos to be cross-referenced more precisely. Still not convinced? Well then, fourthly, finally, and perhaps most importantly, it makes it easier for you, the inventory taker, to keep track of everything and fill out your descriptions without missing anything. And it's as fast or faster once you know how to do it. So if that's why we recommend listing fittings and contents etc. separately, why not keep them entirely separate? Why not include them as separate main items? Well, in brief, to include all items separately would not be ideal, as it would not always be clear at a glance what item a particular fitting was related to, and the report would be rather harder to browse. It's actually quicker to find a sub-item or any item if it's organized in related groups than by scanning one single level list. And once again, it actually makes it easier to ensure that all the items are duly recorded and described to add them as a distinct item in related groups. And when all is said and done, we think you'll agree that the linked item layout looks better too. Having said all this, as mentioned previously, there is nothing to stop you, the user, from ignoring this recommendation if you choose, because in point of fact, any item whatsoever can be included as a main item or a sub-item, as is demonstrated later in this video, and there is also nothing to stop the user from merely describing all aspects of the sub-items as part of a main item description. Now let's head back to our position on the item description form, editing an existing report. The same principle can also be used to create other kinds of item groups. For instance, you can add an item called walls and describe all the walls in a room under it, or even an item entitled Furnishing and have a list of general room furnishings grouped inside, or a cupboard with not only the doors and shelves, but if you like, even the contents listed as sub-items. Note that, as with this last example of the cupboard, you can have sub-items of sub-items, the shelf being a sub-item of the cupboard, which is a sub-item of the furniture group, each group being indented below the item it is connected to. Ultimately, the use of main and sub-items is optional, and whether a particular item is included as a main item in its own right, or as a sub-item linked to another item, is up to the user. Any item can be added as a main item or a sub-item if desired. For instance, you could even say that a door is part of a wall, and indeed you could include the door as a sub-item of the wall if you wanted to. But although the distinction between main and sub-items is not always clear-cut with a hard and fast rule, nevertheless it is sometimes useful to visually group related items together, especially if they are physically connected and even form part of an item's functionality, like a handle or hinge being connected to a door. The various advantages of including, say, a brass handle as a separate though linked item, rather than just describing the handle as part of the general door description, are as follows. Firstly, it enables anyone to take in at a glance all the door accessories by glancing down a column rather than penetrating too deeply into the text. Secondly, it leads to shorter, more succinct descriptions and comments, with little or no need for punctuation and subclauses. These sentences are actually easier to write, as you won't be focusing on sentence arrangement, and they will also be read more easily and rapidly than a single long description or comment describing all aspects of the door. Thirdly, it enables anyone to see at a glance what element a comment is referring to, and it also enables photos to be cross-referenced more precisely. Still not convinced? Well then, fourthly, finally, and perhaps most importantly, it makes it easier for you, the inventory taker, to keep track of everything and fill out your descriptions without missing anything. And it's as fast or faster once you know how to do it. So if that's why we recommend listing fittings and contents etc. separately, why not keep them entirely separate? Why not include them as separate main items? Well, in brief, to include all items separately would not be ideal, as it would not always be clear at a glance what item a particular fitting was related to, and the report would be rather harder to browse. It's actually quicker to find a sub-item or any item if it's organized in related groups than by scanning one single level list. And once again, it actually makes it easier to ensure that all the items are duly recorded and described to add them as a distinct item in related groups. And when all is said and done, we think you'll agree that the linked item layout looks better too. Having said all this, as mentioned previously, there is nothing to stop you, the user, from ignoring this recommendation if you choose, because in point of fact, any item whatsoever can be included as a main item or a sub-item, as is demonstrated later in this video, and there is also nothing to stop the user from merely describing all aspects of the sub-items as part of a main item description. Now let's head back to our position on the item description form, editing an existing report. What makes an item a main item, or a sub-item in any particular room, is the way in which it is added to the room. A main item, when it comes down to it, is just an item which has been added to the main items palette at the top. This can be done in one of two ways, either automatically when the room is added, because the item was included in the room's default item set, as all these items in the upper palette here were, or manually after the room has been added, by clicking the plus button to the right of the item bar. On clicking this plus button, the Select Item form appears, and any number of items from the entire item database can be selected for entry. Use the categories on the left or the letter filters at the top to narrow the search. A sub-item, on the other hand, is not shown in the top palette on this item description form, but is shown in the table below, when the main item to which it has been connected is selected and is also displayed. Sub-items are added to the room by selecting the Add Sub-Item button. The upper box entitled Add to Main Item contains a list of items which may be selected as sub-items of the main item currently highlighted on the item descriptions form. This list amounts to a short list of suggested sub-items, otherwise known as a linked items list, and the items on the list are known as linked items. Note that if I had selected a sub-item rather than a main item within the item description form, and had clicked on the Add Sub-Item button, the upper box on this form would still offer suggestions for items to be added as sub-items of the main item, but the lower box would offer any suggestions for items to be added as sub-items of the sub-item I had highlighted. The button to the lower left will allow you to add any items in the entire item database in case the item you're looking for is not shown on the linked item list above it. If you add items using the Select Other Items button, they will always be added as sub-items of the item you're currently describing, irrespective of whether that item is a main item or a sub-item itself. For more detail on how to use these lists, and to find out how to control which items are displayed on these linked item lists, please view the videos related to item management. For our present purposes, I'll just select some of the items shown in the box to add them as sub-items of the main item. As you can see, these sub-items are indented under the item they have been added to. Once sub-items have been added to a room, they could be reordered if they have not been entered in the order required by clicking here and dragging them. Before looking at the various ways of entering comments and descriptions, I should explain that any comments entered on a previous report within the current tenancy cycle for this property are shown in red. Therefore, if this was the first report created for a property, there would be no red comments. These comments in red are a reminder of the last comments you entered, but it is very important to note that as long as they are in red, they will not show up on the current report when it is produced. If you wish to have them show up on the current report, you must tick them as still applicable, or else edit them in some way. And they will switch to the normal black text, which indicates that they will show up as comments on this report PDF. We will now look at the various methods for entering comments and descriptions. Of course, there is the obvious method. I can type or dictate anything directly into the editing box. But now let's look at some of the other tools provided for entering descriptions and comments. I'll enter one description and one comment using each tool, and then I will go back over them to explain their usage in more detail. To begin, there are lists of readily selectable phrases specifically associated with the item being described, in blue, in the palette on the left. Note that when flicking between the Description and Comments tab on the left-hand Ready Phrases palette, the focus in the tables to the right flicks between the Description and Comment fields, keeping in sync. This works the other way too. The palette on the left will always display descriptions if a description field is highlighted, and it will display comments if a comment field is highlighted, so the contents remain relevant at all times. Now let's use some of the menus of group vocabulary terms along the bottom of this item description form. And lastly, let's use some of these phrases on the left in green, known as pop-up phrases. To finish off describing these sub-items in view, I'll demonstrate using the group menu terms along the bottom once more, and I'll also show the copy and paste function in action. You'll note that the item named partition doesn't have any phrases associated with it yet. To associate the phrase currently in the editing box so it can be entered at a click in future, choose bank. To copy and paste any phrase, just highlight the text you wish to copy, hit copy, navigate to the location you wish to paste, and hit the same button, which will now read paste. Once some text has been copied, it can be pasted any number of times until some new text is copied. Of course, free text is self-explanatory and stands in no need of further explanation. Clearly I can type anything in here, using a keyboard, touchscreen or otherwise, or dictate anything in the editing box using appropriate software. However, I believe that the description I just entered into the editing field is likely to be useful for describing this particular item fairly frequently, so I'll use the bank button here, which stores the sentence in this list of ready description phrases. This brings us neatly onto the subject of stored phrases. Please note that if you click bank without highlighting any part of the text in the editing box, any and all text shown in the editing box, no matter how it was originally entered, will be stored in the list of phrases. All phrases currently associated with the item selected are displayed in this list on the left. If I wish to see more or less of the phrases available, I can resize this palette with ease. However, frequently it is better to store less than the entire content of the editing box, as it may be some while before you wish to enter all the contents again. When deciding what to bank, look for common denominators, useful phrases, not necessarily full sentences, and select the part you wish to bank. For instance, I can see two separate phrases in the description just entered that might be used separately to describe a bin. Similarly, there are two separate phrases in the comment just entered which have not already been banked, and which might frequently be useful in commenting on a bin. If the words you want to use are available as a ready phrase, and you're aware of it, this is a very efficient way of entering data. So if you find yourself using a word or group of words to describe an item or items frequently, and it is not banked already, use the bank button and bank it. To demonstrate how efficient the entry can be, I'll add all three phrases I just banked. To add each comment on a separate line, use the Create Another Comment button. We will have a look at these green phrases, known as pop-up phrases, after looking at the group term menus, as they will be easier to appreciate once we have done so. So the third method I will describe is the entry of text from these menus of categorized or grouped terms. At all times, you have access to a systematic list of detailed menus from which to select text. For example, there are a range of terms for Surface-related words included on installation, material terms, the name of the item selected is always available for entry by clicking here. Quantity terms can be entered from this menu. There are terms to describe the severity of damage, and vocabulary related specifically to damage types. Useful connecting words and punctuation are available for entry from this row. Notice that on clicking on a particular value from a menu of terms, the term is entered, and most menus then automatically close, leaving you free to make your next selection. However, the next menu I'll choose, for words useful describing a position, does not, as you will often need to select more than one consecutive value from this menu to describe a position. When you've finished selecting values, click on the X button to the top right or the back button to the bottom right. I'll add 2 more comments using these menus. Notice that in entering the last comment, I used the copy and paste function again, which can be used at any time when entering text. Finally, I'll use the condition-related terms, which are frequently useful if you are familiar with the contents of that menu. Notice that unlike the phrases palette on the left, the contents of the menus below do not change based on the item that is being described. They are constant to encourage familiarity. However, there are 2 notable exceptions to this: the Link Damages tab and the other exception is the Item Type menu. The contents of the linked damage types and linked item types are adjusted under the settings so as to offer a selection strictly relevant to the item being described. To see how to adjust these settings, please view the videos related to item management. However, you can opt to view all item types or damage types at a click if you wish. Using these menus of grouped terms can be efficient, particularly for relatively short sentences, if you know just where the words you are looking for are likely to be found. Of course, this is most likely to occur if you are familiar with the menus available and their contents. As I'll demonstrate later, you can easily edit the contents of these menus, add new menus, or delete existing ones. The last method to be discussed in detail is using the green pop-up phrases displayed here. These operate by opening particular group term menus, such as the ones we were just viewing, one after the other automatically, in a predetermined order for you to select from, and then they generate a sentence from the word selected. These are very useful indeed for descriptions and even comments, as many sentences fall into a particular pattern. If I wish to see which menus will be offered by a particular pop-up phrase, positioning the cursor over the name of the pop-up phrase will display the group term menu names in the order that they will be presented. For instance, the standard Describe Item pop-up phrase that has been created here will bring up the Quantity, Color, Surface, Material, and Item Type menus. Now I'll demonstrate using it. Note that any menu presented as part of a pop-up phrase can be readily skipped without entering a value if no term is required from that menu. I'll show the ways of editing, managing, and storing pop-up phrases later in this video. The buttons to the right of the editing field that I haven't yet explicitly touched on, but you've seen me use, are fairly self-explanatory. Clear removes all text currently in the field, whereas delete merely removes one character each time it is pressed. Delete will also remove whatever portion of the text has been highlighted. Of course, if you have a physical or touchscreen keyboard, you may also use the delete keys on the keyboard as per usual. If text has been highlighted, the paste button switches to a copy button, and if pressed it will copy the selected text and return to a paste button. You may then paste the copied text any number of times into any number of fields. And undo will undo the last text entry or deletion. Please note that the undo function relates to changes that have occurred to text in the editing box since the current field was highlighted. So now we've looked at all the tools for entering text, you may be thinking, I've got all these methods for entering comments and descriptions, so which should I use and when? Well, the answer to that will obviously depend to some extent on your personal preferences, and also on the capabilities of the equipment that you're using to enter the information. For instance, how easy typing is. No doubt, once you've got used to the tools available and have used them a little, you'll have your own particular preferences. The idea was to put a range of effective tools at your disposal and let you develop the style that suits you best. However, I can make the following suggestions. If you find yourself using a particular phrase to describe an item with frequency, bank it. From then on, entering that particular phrase for that item will be super efficient. If you are comfortable using voice recognition software and can get it working well for you, as many do, then this can be an extremely fast and effective way of entering data, and it can be combined with all the other methods such as phrases. As mentioned previously, a separate video has been dedicated to voice recognition software and the use of dictation. This is a very powerful tool and can be used to great effect. Supposing you do not use voice recognition software and there is no ready phrase to describe the item, perhaps try a pop-up phrase, if you are familiar with one that will suit your purposes. Note that familiarity is the key to this feature. If you do not believe that the sentence falls into a pop-up phrase pattern, then either create the pop-up phrase so you can use it next time, or else use the menus of group terms along the bottom. Once again, familiarity with the group term menus and their contents is the key to using them effectively. With familiarity, they can be used to enter data rapidly. Customizing the menus, if a term isn't there, takes no time, and then it's there whenever you need it. I have mentioned free text entry last because of all the entry methods it depends on the equipment used and the comfort level of the user the most. If you are merely entering data already noted down elsewhere onto a desktop and you are a keen typist, you are probably going to type. If you're out in the field using a tablet with keyboards you can't get on with, or for that matter handwriting recognition you can't get on with, and you're not much of a typist anyway, plus you've got fast on the draw of the menus, you're not going to type much. So that's all I can say on the subject of typing. Getting familiar with the software and developing your own preferences will not take long. Try things out, and within 2 or 3 reports you'll be well on your way to being an expert user of iAssist. Now, let's look at ways of ensuring we don't lose time through repetition. First of all, supposing we want to duplicate an item within a room, this is as straightforward as highlighting the item in question and clicking the D for duplicate. You then have to decide whether you want to duplicate the descriptions, comments, and sub-items. If you decide to copy sub-items, then whatever you decide in terms of copying comments and descriptions will apply to sub-items as well as main items. In this instance, let's assume we wish to copy the description as the item is matching, but not the comments as the condition of the second cupboard is not identical to that of the first. As you can see, the item has been successfully duplicated with the sub-items and descriptions, but no comments. To change the order of the item, drag and drop it. Rename the duplicate if required to differentiate it from the original. Now let's suppose that once we have described a particular item, we wish to copy the item, its descriptions and/or its comments to other rooms. As there have clearly been previous reports carried out for this property, Let's just assume that the owner has repainted all the walls freshly, with a different colour, from magnolia to white. By the way, in case you hadn't guessed, to delete a comment, merely highlight it and click the X button at the top of the comments column. Now let's reuse a comment made in a previous report when the walls were last newly painted. To assign these comments and descriptions to all other rooms affected, click the A button for Assign. Then tick the rooms we wish to assign to. Actually, it may often be faster to use the Check All button and then uncheck the ones we don't want to copy to. Finally, decide whether we wish to copy across descriptions, comments, and sub-items, and whether we want to overwrite any existing wall items in the other rooms. In this instance, we clearly do want to copy both comments and descriptions, so we'll tick those. There are no sub-items, so we can leave that unticked, and we do want to overwrite any existing wall items in other rooms. There is clearly only going to be one walls item in each room. As you can see, we have successfully altered the general walls description and comment in each room at a stroke without altering the descriptions or comments attached to any sub-items. If we had wished to assign across an item with any number of sub-items, that would have been as simple as ticking the Copy Sub-Items button. The Assign feature is extremely useful for saving time and should be used whenever possible. Up until this point in the video, we've been looking mostly at using the options already provided, at navigating around the item description form, adding new items to the report, various methods and buttons for adding descriptions and comments to items, duplicating items, and assigning items to multiple rooms. This remaining part of the video will deal more with managing and editing the options available, so we will look at creating and managing the phrases, pop-up phrases, and menu terms. All these things are very straightforward to achieve and also very useful when the occasion demands. To start with, let's look at creating and managing phrases. In fact, we've already seen the easiest way to create a phrase earlier. Just hit bank and all the text in the editing field, or any text highlighted, will be banked and associated with the item selected at the time. This is a very good way of adding ready phrases because it fits into your workflow and you can readily grow your database without really pausing to do so. However, what if you wanted to see all of the ready phrases in the database and associate a ready phrase with many items at one time? Or if you wanted to remove or edit a phrase from the palette on the left? To start with, let's bank a brand new phrase called Test Phrase 1. Now we've banked this phrase, suppose we wanted to remove or edit it. To do these things, click on the pencil icon at the top of the Ready Phrases palette on the left. Here you see all the items in the database down the left-hand column. In the right palette, you note that there are two tabs, one for descriptions and one for comments, as all remarks are stored and presented in these two separate groups. You also have a button to select either stored phrases or pop-up phrases. For the moment we'll stay with stored phrases. When you first enter the Manage Sentences form, if you had a comment field highlighted when clicking on the Manage Phrases button, the first view displayed would be the comments, and if you had a description field highlighted, the first view displayed would be the descriptions. However, if you decide to edit the comments while you are here, click on the Comments tab, and click back on the Descriptions tab if you wish to return to the descriptions. Remembering our original purpose of removing or editing the phrase Test Phrase 1, which was entered as a description, we can click on the relevant letter filter for a more focused list if we wish. And here we see it. Note that next to each phrase there is a tick box. If a phrase is ticked while a particular item is highlighted on the left, then it will be visible in the left-hand Ready Phrases palette in the item description form, while the item which is selected on the left is being edited. So if we untick Test Phrase 1, and we tick the phrase freestanding, then on returning to the item descriptions form, Test Phrase 1, which we unselected, is no longer visible as an option in the left-hand palette, but freestanding, which we ticked, is. In conclusion, any time you bank a phrase in the item description form, it is not only added to this list of Resi phrases to the left, but also the phrase is added to this form, and the tick box is checked for the item it's been associated with. To link a phrase to multiple items at once, you could highlight each item on the left that you wish to associate the stored phrase with, and tick the checkbox next to the phrase in question. But in most cases, it will be more convenient merely to highlight the phrase in question by clicking on the text, not the tick box. Choose Assign Phrases to Multiple Items, and tick all the items you wish to associate the phrase with. Obviously, if I select any of the items that I just chose a moment ago, Test Phrase 2 has now been ticked automatically to indicate that the phrase has now been associated with the item in question. You can also associate a phrase with every single item in the database at a click, if you choose, by using this button at the bottom, which is useful for any phrase that you believe will be of universal or near universal application. As you can see, any other item I might select now has Test Phrase 2 associated with it. You can change the order in which all the associated phrases for any particular item will be displayed in the item description form by clicking on the Order Phrases for Item button. Also a good place to view the list of all the phrases associated with an item without leaving the phrase management form and returning to the item description form. If I click on this phrase and drag it above white double glazed UPVC window and then return to the item description form and select a window item, as you'd expect, Test Phrase 2 now appears above the phrase white double glazed UPVC. Finally, please note that I can add brand new phrases to the list while using the Phrase Manager by clicking on the plus button here. Of course, this phrase will not be associated with any items until I tick some boxes. I can also edit any phrase by clicking on the pencil icon here. And I can delete any phrase by using the X icon. Please remember that deleting a phrase means it no longer exists, and therefore it will no longer be associated with any item. So if you only want to remove it from the list of ready phrases for a particular item, highlight the item on the left and untick the checkbox next to the phrase in question. As previously demonstrated, the pop-up phrases automatically bring up particular vocabulary menus in a particular order for you to enter data. To view the pop-up phrases, click on the button here. You will notice that the buttons and layout are exactly the same as for the standard phrases, and in fact the principles of associating particular pop-up phrases with particular items are exactly the same, so I will not re-examine them here. Instead, I will concentrate on showing how to set up a new pop-up phrase, and afterwards I will show how to use item categories to associate any standard or pop-up phrase with relevant items very quickly. As with the standard phrases, to add a brand new pop-up phrase, click here. In this box at the top, give the new pop-up phrase the name that will be used to identify it, and which will be shown in the left selection palette on the item description form. This name should be useful to you in indicating what the pop-up phrase will consist of. Always remember, however, that hovering over the pop-up phrase will display the vocabulary menus that will be called as a prompt. Next, just click on the menus that you wish to pop up and drag them into the phrase breakdown box below. Clearly, In order to use this function, it is useful to be well acquainted with the vocabulary menus available and their contents. However, please note that as I demonstrate later, the contents of all the vocabulary menus may be easily edited or modified, and menus can be deleted or added. If you add text in the phrase breakdown box between the menus, that text will be entered in between the values selected from the menus when you use the pop-up phrase in question. Don't forget that when using a pop-up phrase, you can always opt to skip a particular menu without entering a value from it. At the bottom, you can select whether to add it to the descriptions or comments group. In this instance, as it is a description, we will leave it as it is and select OK. As mentioned previously, I have the same options for assigning pop-up phrases to items as I had for standard phrases. Assuming that this describe surface pop-up phrase could be used for nearly every item, rather than selecting particular items and checking the box to the left of the phrase for each item, or even using the assign selected pop-up phrase to multiple items, in this instance I'll assign the pop-up phrase just created to all the items in the database. Note that the describe surface pop-up phrase is now shown on the left for each and any item. To use the new pop-up phrase, I just click on it. And the menus I selected pop up in the order I arranged them in a moment ago. Note that if I wish to select multiple values from one menu, I can click on this button here. But if I have ticked the Allow multiple selections for a particular menu, I must then click on the Next button to bring up the next menu. Now I'll very briefly create and apply one last pop-up phrase, and in doing so I will use an item category to associate the phrase with many relevant items very rapidly. Suppose there is no pop-up phrase to comment on whether electronic items have been checked and whether they are working, along with their general condition. Let's create a pop-up phrase for this purpose and associate it with all electronic equipment. To start, I'll include the position menu, so I can describe the item location if required and differentiate between similar items. Now I'll include the item name. Notice that alone of all the menus, this menu does not require you to select a value when it is included, because it will automatically enter the name of whichever item you are describing or commenting on. Now here's the item check vocabulary. And finally, let's add the ability to add a more general comment about the item's condition if desired. The pop-up phrase is to be a comment, so we're all set. Now here comes the part demonstrating one of the uses for item categories. If we select Assign to Multiple, we can then select the electronics category on the left, as it is electronic items that we're interested in. By the way, to find out how to set up and populate item categories, view the videos relating to item management. And to finish, tick the Select All button at the bottom of the items palette. Please note that this Select All button will select all the items that remain in the palette, so if a filter has been applied, such as a category or letter filter, it will select all the items belonging to that category or starting with those letters, and if no filter has been applied, it will select literally every item in the database. Note that a switch was included in the electronics category. The item checks pop-up phrase is now associated with the switch. Now let's try it out. Note that the bar above, which shows the values that have been selected so far, shows that the selected item name menu did its job, and the item name, in this case switch, was entered automatically. So that's phrases and pop-up phrases covered. For the grand finale, let's look at changing the content of the group term menus below, and even adding new menus. It may be worth pointing out that the quantity and number menus always come first, and afterwards all other menus listed in alphabetical reading order. If I'm entering a value from a menu of group terms, say for example the condition terms, and the particular word or words I'm looking for are not included, then if I want to include the word for selection in future, I can just click on the Edit button at the bottom of the menu. This takes me to a page entitled Administration Descriptions Form, where all the group term menus are selectable on the left, and the selected menu's contents are displayed on the right. This page can also be visited at any time by going to the settings and selecting the Grouped Terms Menu Manager tab. New terms can be added to menus by clicking here. If I fill out the plural box, it will add a separate plural version of the term to the menu. The alternative field is designed to save you time, prompting you to add another similar term while you are adding this one. And the priority box can be used to promote the term to the top of the menu, but for the current example, we'll leave the terms having standard priority. So now all three terms, test condition, test conditions, and similar test condition, have been added. Any term may be edited at any time. Or deleted using the buttons at the bottom of the palette. Of course, brand new menus can also be added and deleted, or the menu titles edited, using the buttons at the bottom of the list on the left. If new menus are added, they will also appear at the bottom of the item description form, along with any existing menus. The new term we created and didn't delete now appears in the conditions menu, and of course to add it we merely click on it. That concludes this video on describing items. I trust it has been useful. Thank you for watching.